The past is prologue. I wish it weren't. I wish this moment could stand on its own as one of the greatest spectacularly failed cons in history, but in finance, certain shadows are too large to escape. This is the salad oil scandal, the magnum opus of Anthony Tino DeAngelis, born with fraud in his blood, and also a footnote, because this is really a story about how Warren Buffett became one of the richest people in the world. It's the 1950s and Tino is hustling. A Bronx native who'd worked in the food industry his whole life, he's made it to the top of the Adolph Gogol Company in New Jersey. He hears about something called the National School Lunch Act and realizes it could be a gold mine for his business. The intent of the program is to keep farmers afloat by absorbing their excess supply and redistributing it to children from low-income families via school lunches. Tino begins participating in the program, except he decides to make it worth his while. He's going to cut corners on meat he's supplying. None of it is inspected, which means more profit for him and his company, until one day the government catches up and shuts him down. It's an important learning experience for Tino, but he learns the wrong thing, which is that government contracts are the best contracts. In 1955, Tino starts a new company called Allied Crude Vegetable Oil Refining Corporation that has a new government program in its sights, Food for Peace. The idea is the same, but this time, instead of surplus food going to kids, it's going to countries in Europe that are still rebuilding in the aftermath of World War II. Tino's product of choice at Allied is salad oil, a byproduct of the soybean crop, which is growing greater and greater in the United States, and as a result, producing ample surplus to flow through the program. Tino enters the industry to little fanfare, but immediately begins making waves by undercutting everyone else in the business to build inventory. He's acquiring huge export deals, filling his building-sized vats in New Jersey with oil, and to the surprise of many industry veterans in the Midwest, emerging as one of the biggest players in the entire market. It's unclear where the con that Tito ran began. He has a massive but at best break-even company. Did he just become unsatisfied with that and go for broke? Or did the profits never matter because all he needed was a business with a provenance of legitimacy? Either way, the next phase of his plan is one from which there was no turning back. At this time, American Express has a warehouse inspection unit that verifies collateral for banks who then issue loans based on the inspected goods. Tino's towers full of salad oil are exactly the sort of asset they will work with. They send an inspector to verify Tino's inventory, and in return, Tino is able to take out millions in loans. He then uses those funds to build more tanks, fill those, and use the new inventory to take out even more loans. There's just one catch. The tanks are mostly full of salt water. American Express inspectors aren't in the business of being overly demanding of one of their best clients, so when they tour the facility and see vats filled to the brim, that's good enough for them. They don't worry about whether they're looking at a thin layer of oil floating on a denser material. The legitimate product gets stretched so thin at one point that Tino has to create a special system of pipes to drain a tank after inspection and top off the next one before it gets examined. Had anyone been paying attention, the fraud would have been obvious. Much like how Bernie Madoff's books showed him making trades that represented more volume than existed in a given security, Allied at one point receives loans based on an inventory greater than all the salad oil that exists in America. So, what's the end game here? Just take the money and run? No. The papers called him the salad oil king, and this was that king's gambit. remember, Tino doesn't have no oil. He only has about 10% of what American Express thinks he has, but 10% of America's entire supply is still a lot. In 1963, Tino learns that the Soviet Union's sunflower crop has had a terrible growing season. Sunflower seeds are a major source of oils for use throughout that country and the entirety of Europe. He thinks to himself, what if he corners the market in soybean futures right as overseas demand turns to America to fill the shortfall in their oil needs? He'd be the sole supplier at a time when prices are at all-time highs. With pockets flush with cash from ill-gotten loans, that's what he sets out to do. Employing various Wall Street investment firms to place trades, plus setting up a variety of dummy corporations so it looks like the demand is coming from multiple sources, Tino begins purchasing huge amounts of soybean futures. His bankroll, plus his use of margin, make it so that 10 cents of movement in the underlying represent a $12 million change in his position. Soon, prices start to rise, causing other firms to speculate and jump in. Tino is so close to the finish line. It makes you wonder how many of these schemes are going on at any given time where the schemer just pulls it off. But soon, it becomes clear that he'd miscalculated. For political reasons, the Soviet Union ends up not being able to buy American soybeans, and for the pricing reason, neither will the rest of the world. He'd driven the price beyond the point of legitimate demand. This wasn't crude oil that the world runs on and for which demand is mostly inelastic. This was salad oil. People will just figure out something else. The price of soybean futures collapses. Tino gets margin called, the government comes to investigate him for market manipulation, and then the American Express warehousing guys show up just to double check on things so they can put minds of the bankers that loan to Allied at ease. Hundreds of millions are lost. One major brokerage goes under and another has to be bailed out. Tino ends up serving 7 years in prison and immediately starts a Ponzi scheme in the hog industry upon his release. But this was never really about him. Remember? In Omaha, Nebraska, Warren Buffett is watching. He sees that American Express shares have fallen by 50%, far too much in his opinion. The firm has suffered substantial financial damage, but it will survive. The only risk he sees is if the American Express brand suffers. They're going to look incompetent. It's going to be all over the papers. The next day, President Kennedy is assassinated. Buffett takes the swing of a lifetime and puts 40% of his partnership's funds at risk to buy 5% of American Express. This is the beginning. Thanks for watching, guys.